Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of May, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. We will start with you from Kiev, with the Kiev news. To be more precise, today is the 20th of May, and today is the last day of Zelensky's powers as president. More precisely, if we talk about that, let's say, scheme, manipulation, which was invented by the Ukrainian government. This is certainly not the last day, at least according to the papers. But if we talk about the constitution of Ukraine, about the clear framework, let's say, Zelensky's due from the ad. Then today is his last day, yes. Starting tomorrow, it's as if he is no longer considered, let's say, a fake president, but all of his terms, which he will be trying to extend his term at the moment with the help of martial law. There is such a point, in principle, there is one in every state, both in the Russian Federation and in the Republic of Belarus. Here in Ukraine, in the case of military operations, martial law may be imposed, then certain, let's say, paragraphs of the Constitution cease to apply. It is this paragraph that Zelensky uses. But there is one small point, yes. In fact, yes, today, on the 20th of May, his powers, let's say, ended there. The last continuation of martial law, or rather the extension, took place in early May. In other words, it turns out May, June, July, August, and in the month of August, let's say, the last legitimate extension of martial law will end. In fact, in August, Zelensky will extend, and the Parliament of Ukraine will extend martial law. Already being in the status of, well, not the president, not the parliament. But we'll see. Of course, everyone was waiting for this event, everyone was waiting for this day. From the wrong point of view, it is unlikely that something will definitely change. Western countries have recognized Zelensky as president, and they will continue to recognize him. Everyone was wondering how the reaction would change, what interesting words and messages would come from the Kremlin. How the whole world would react to this situation. And it was just very interesting to see Zelensky's next tricks. How he would get out of the current situation. Well, let's watch, because it's very, very interesting. Well, let's move on to the line of combat contact, and the most important, the most interesting. The most, let's say, stunning news, of course, comes from the Seversky direction. Like a bolt from the blue. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that during the military operations of the South Group of troops, it was possible to establish full control over the settlement of Belovka. For a very long time, the Russian army was going to this, let's say, moment. The battles were fought for Belogorovka for, in my opinion, the 23rd whole year. This is the 24th, let's say, 5 months. A year and a half. One of the longest battles that was only fought during a specially military operation, active hostilities. Let me remind you that Belogorovka, after the Lysychansk agglomeration of Severodonetsk fell, and the Russian army established control over the settlements. You retreated, and, let's say, advancing on the heels of Ukrainian soldiers, the Russian army managed to enter Verkhny Kamyanka, Zolotarevka, including Belogorovka, and including Grigorovka. For example, the most extreme positions after, say, the completion of that summer campaign of the offensive Russian army. The units of the Russian army were in Grigorovka. That is, even individual units may have sometimes tried to enter the Serebryanka itself, that is, Belovka was far behind. But already during the autumn, let's say, Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russian units were forced to withdraw. Not only from Grigorovka, Belogorovka, but also from the estuary, Yampol, and all of these settlements. And after that moment, the front seemed to be established here. The 81st Brigade was responsible for the defense in this direction from the Afu, and after that it began. Hundreds, perhaps dozens of attempts to attack the settlement, none of them was crowned with any success. As soon as the Russian army did not storm, both from the south, and from the east, and from the north, they tried to cross Seversky Donetsk. And as soon as they did not attack, they did not use any weapons, but in the end the Afu combat vehicle could not withstand this load. The Russian combat vehicle, and the defense cracked, burst, crumbled, and the armed forces of Ukraine were forced to retreat. But we have updated the map, yes. But again, the whole update is absolutely, let's say, we have no idea about them at all. As if exactly where the positions of the Russian army are located, where the Ukrainian one is. Since the report came from the summary of the Ministry of Defense, almost no information was received before that. Just remember the other day we discussed with you that the first news appeared that Russian units entered Oktyabrskaya Street there, on Pervomeyskaya Street, and after that, nothing. Then I remember making a video, they said that no information confirming the promotion had been received. And already today, like a thunderbolt, again, I repeat, the Ministry of Defense reports full control of the only sky. The situation with the dump, with the quarry, is still unclear, but in any case, this is of course a breakthrough of promotion. It is unlikely that the Ministry of Defense, let's say, just reported such news without having any basis for it. And so on and so forth. That is, in any case, a breakthrough has occurred. Now, of course, we should expect some kind of intensification of hostilities. For sure, the Russian army, and now being on the heights in a dominant position, will try to advance further towards the settlement of Grigorivka, and of course this will lead, well, the further Russian units advance along the Seversky Don-Donbass River, the closer the Russian army will be to Serebryanka and to the north. The worse and worse the situation in Usyubu will develop, of course. In the remote forests, in Yampilovka, and here in the south of Dybrov, and so on and so forth. But if we talk to you here, this was not the only news from the direction, of course, not only Belogorovka today, let's say. News came from this direction. Very important news, including today, came from another, let's say, such a settlement, which is also, to a certain extent, let's say, a bone in the throat of the Russian army. This is a disputed settlement. Moreover, the video was published today by the armed forces of Ukraine. Well, I can't say. They posted this video with a different sauce. In these frames, we see with you a very heavy offensive of the Russian army, very slowly. Well, here the Ukrainian authors, when they posted this post, they assure that in these frames we can observe the offensive, let's say the Russian army, the settlement is disputed. But here the emphasis was mainly on how the command of this particular offensive took place in general. As we can see for ourselves, Russian technology has been marking time in one place for a very long time. They may decide to go on the offensive, or something is in the way. In the end, in general, let's go. But the video boils down to the fact that, in fact, the equipment was sent to the minefields. It seems like they were overcome. But in any case, of course, it is important that an offensive took place here from the pumping station, further to the west and went. In fact, everything is debatable. In other words, there is an extremely high probability that, as a result of the offensive of the same offensive, Russian units managed to establish control over this locality as well. And of course, we always remember and keep in mind that fierce fighting is underway in Verkhnykamiansk. Well, let's probably increase the number of updates from the first day. This will give us a much better picture of what is happening. Here is the first direction. We discussed it, Belogorsk. Here there was a breakthrough of the Russian army. Accordingly, one of the several directions of the already broken through Russian army, of course, develops success. So far, the situation is unclear as it develops in the Verkhnykamiansky district. Here they are trying to storm the support. Here is the highest point in the direction of White Mountain. It is not yet clear under the control of the Russian army, or still under the control of the APU, but in a controversial way. Today we see what a big trick. Russian units have been working quite closely in this direction for a month. Today, a video was received about an attempt to storm, break through, and most likely the disputed one, is already under the control of the Russian army, or rather its western part. We remember with you that during the month, as in April, Russian units worked closely on the Belogorovka-Vyemka railway, further to Seversk, and of course Razdalovka itself. That is. But in fact, if we summarize, out of the 5 areas that we discussed, Razdalovka, dredging, disputable. Verkhnykamianskaya Belogorovka, at least 2 directions, report concrete success, concrete progress. And, well, quite serious things that may follow after that. In other words, we understand that the Seversk direction was officially, let's say, open today. And the offensive will now be constantly conducted here, and the APU will probably be forced to retreat in this direction as well. Then we are moving with you to the Clock Yar, where a lot of information comes from. Now, again, as always, at the moment of the most difficult fighting, the most difficult moments, everyone was divided into 2 conditional camps. Some claim that the Russian units managed to break through the defense of the village in Yara, enter its eastern quarter, gain a foothold there, take control of a separate building. And in general, despite the fact that the situation is developing quite difficult, it is difficult, in general. As if there is progress here, well, as if there is already, in fact. Fighting is being conducted on the territory of the easternmost quarter. This is the first camp. The second camp says that there was an offensive, but it was extremely unsuccessful, and the Russian units, having failed, were forced to roll back. And moreover, I really want to note that these two camps are not divided according to the principle of nationality, yes. That is, some are pro-Ukrainian, and the second are pro-Russian. Absolutely not. There is both on one side and on the other. That is, in general, to summarize, the area here is completely covered with the fog of war. But we have already changed the map, painted it, but in these frames, for example, we see how the Russian tank works. Here it is, you can't see it under the fog, under the smoke more precisely. Here he strikes right next to the garages, and almost nothing arrives at him. Here is a Russian tank, pay attention, calmly worked at heights. It is reported that it seems like Russian units control all garages, but high-rise buildings, northern garages, are under the control of Ukrainian units. This building seems to be under the control of the Russian army. And it is not yet clear what is going on with these two buildings that are at the entrance. Because today, after the previous videos of entering the area and taking control, strikes are being published, say, on the building that may be under Russian control from the Russian side with the use of flamethrower systems of the sun. That is, but this footage confirms that it is possible that Russian units were forced to withdraw from the eastern entrance. If you ask me, I am also interested in the following question in addition to all these points. And in what status are the VSO strongholds along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal now? These support points, they are very powerful support points here, they are at a height. And let me remind you that once again, let's go back. A Russian tank. So let's take it. Here the Russian tank worked from this position. From here it struck at the heights, located already in the easternmost part of the Yar. And he worked in fact, unhindered, without any resistance, and without any flanking attacks from these strongholds at altitude. The distance here is really low, yes, small. That is, if there were funds and a desire, 600 meters, and the tank would have been destroyed. But for some reason, there was no resistance from the AFU, no counterstrikes. In other words, this is a fact that does not leave me alone personally, because in addition to the visits of the Yara, Vostokny clock, it is very important if indeed Russian units manage to advance along the channel and take these strong points. It's just that no information is being published about this so far in order, perhaps, to maintain secrecy on the operation and so on. Further and the like, then in general, despite the fact that there are some moments and suspicions that the offensive is developing extremely hard so far. If the Russian units really made their way along these supports along the canal, then, of course, the whole story is already solved. According to this Eastern Chapel. In other words, resistance is only a matter of time, and the price that everyone is willing to pay to win 1 or 2 or 3 days. And, let's say, before the same summit in Switzerland, or before the next Ramstein meeting, or before Zelensky loses his full legitimacy. Then we are moving with you to the northern flank, where Russian units, continuing the assault actions in the direction of Kalinovka, published a large number of videos. Here, on the whole, history repeats the history that we observed in the Bogdanovka area. A large number of strikes in Beer by drones, on positions in the USU in the village, mopping up the building. You see, there is practically not a single hole left, but here, based on the timings, based on the standard situation that we saw, let's say, in the same Bogdanovka, well, for at least 2 or 3 weeks. They will strike at it and try to clean everything up. After all, everything here is still in its infancy, plus the forest. Well, that is, it is extremely difficult, and it can still happen for a long time. Then we are moving with you to Kleshivka. Here, Russian units resumed, let's say, assault operations. At the moment, attempts are being made to expand the control zone of the Russian army to, let's say, from Ivanovskoye in the southwestern direction. In order to take control of this, let's say, an extensive network of strongholds located northwest of Kleshivka. Drones are working, operators are working in Beer, trying to clean up the area, artillery strikes are being carried out. Artillery strikes on strong points, forest belts, which are located in this whole area between the fields. In other words, there is, let's say, active preparation before the start of assault operations. In Kleshivka, more and more cartographers are already starting to update their maps, indicating that everything, almost all of Kleshivka 80%, is already under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. while it seems that the western part remains behind the Apu, that is, the forest fields, the green area. And it is at a height, and it will be extremely difficult to storm its forehead, of course. And perhaps there is an attempt to wait here for a breakthrough from Ivanovskoye in the southwestern direction, in order to enter the Afu groups here in the rear, and simply force the Afu to retreat here. Well, that is, in any case, there are extremely difficult situations here, and, in fact, the Russian unit is already fighting for the last square meters before they go all the way to Seversky, to the Donbass Canal on a very long stretch, from the village of Grigorievka to the village of Zelenopol, Kurdyumovka, and even further south to Mayorsk. The entire channel will be under the control of the Russian army, and then it will be possible to calmly release resources, reserves, flanks, and continue to move in a calm mode to Seversk. Already as here, we note with you a fairly significant advance. That's the kind of story we get here. Then we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, where persistent fighting continues. And as in the Cheretino area, so in the south, everywhere in fact. But today, we received a lot of interesting shots. At least cartographers note that the units of the Russian army managed to expand the control zone to the east of Karamik, in the direction of Alexandropol. In other words, this whole area, if we sum up the various cartographers ourselves, then according to their data, their information, the divisions of the Russian Federation managed to clean up and establish control over the fields between Karamik, Novokalinova, and Highway N20. Can you tell me what is remarkable here, what is interesting here? But in general, the following can be noted. If we increase the number of updates from the 1st of May, then we see how tightly the Russian units worked on the supports in the area of Alexander Field, west of Alexander Field. A large company strongpoint, yes. And then in the Novgorod, New York area, and here. That is, in general, you see there are 4 supports, 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of them were under fairly heavy artillery fire. The Fabs flew, the Suns flew. That is, what I'm leading all this to, what I'm saying it to. All this information, if analyzed in a month, it is very similar and very much adds up to the picture. That it is possible and most likely that Russian units will advance in this direction, in order to squeeze out the Afu units from Toretsky, New York. That is, in fact, this is preparation immediately for an hour in Yarum, for the Yarskaya offensive operation. To begin the Toretsk-Dzerzhinsky offensive operation, which will go from Novoselovka, Novobakhmutovka, Krasnogorskovka, Karamika, Osheratina, and so on to the north. Here's trying to pass all these boundaries. That's exactly the first one. Well, in fact, it's worth breaking through the first line of defense, there to reach the center of New York. To walk, it seems, as easy as it is to say, to walk to the center of New York, as just the name of some novel, yes. But it will really be very difficult for the university to defend itself here, even if the Russian units manage to reach the same Kalinova or Staraya Nikolaevka. Well, there are options here, for sure the Russian team is thinking about them now. And then, there is the promotion of Russian units in the fields between Semenovka, Burdik, Novopokrovsky, without any personnel. And it also confirms the complete final control over the Umanskaya-Naytailovo highway. Russian units have fully established control over this area. The fighting has been going on here for quite a long time. Let me remind you that Avdiivka fell down in January-February, and these are all square meters. Further west, Lastikina, Severnaya, Toninkaya, Orlovka, Umanskaya, Pervomeyskaya did not melt. For the last 4 months, 3 months, very, let's say, bloody battles have been fought here. And now there is the last settlement in this direction, called Yasnobrodovka, which is unlikely to even try to hold in the forest. Well, although there is no sense here from the point of view of, let's say, logic. From the point of view it is possible to win a couple more days there, then perhaps some kind of logic is present. Well, Krasnogorskovka, again someday there is no information, but now, after what happened in Belagorskovka, it is difficult to make any assumptions at all, conclusions, and what is happening here, because, well, perhaps now the last street in Krasnogorskovka is being cleaned, as it turned out, with Belogorsk. It's just that we don't know about it, because they seem to be trying to keep the silence mode. Therefore, while we are watching and waiting for additional information. So, then we are moving with you to the Novomikhailovsky direction. Here we see with you a lot of interesting information. And today, a frame was immediately received that the pro-Ukrainian dictate painted, let's say, a part of the redevelopment under the control of a subdivision of the Russian Federation. And only later were the frames published on the basis of which this, let's say, update took place. According to the footage, the 79th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published artillery strikes on the positions of the Russian Federation already in Paraskovevka itself. If you follow the official channel of the 79th Telegram Brigade, there is of course fear, horror and panic. And in general what is happening and how to live on. And in general, this kind of panic and defeatist mood is generally present in the ranks of the 79th Brigade. Since there is no normal ammunition supply, the reinforcements that were planned to be sent here were eventually sent to Kharkiv. But in general, it's like, let's say, if we talk about booms and hearts, then the defeat for Konstantinovka is already felt in principle. And at the same time, the Russian army is advancing in the fields between the same Novomikhailovka, Konstantinovka, Poroskovevka and Sladky strongholds are being taken. Russian units are, let's say, slowly and surely moving towards Route 0524. In the fields, some equipment, some artillery installations, works are constantly being destroyed, counter-battery fighting is underway. Mortars are being destroyed, and personnel are being attacked in the processes of rotation and evacuation attempts there. In other words, Russian units are working smoothly and very effectively here. A little to the west, in the western part of Konstantinovka, there are permanent drones in Padrins. Well, that is, everything is like this according to textbooks. Ugledar, no news of the Staromare harvest yet, no news, except for the next arrivals of Fabs. The next arrivals of Sun strikes there, Ashfire systems. In other words, an attempt is being made to sweep the northern outskirts, that is, more precisely, the northern central part, in order to clear a bridgehead for the further advance of Russian units. A similar story in Staromayersky. Strikes are being carried out on the main logistics arteriums that go from Makarovka to the south. But it is already clear here, it is obvious that the Russian units will not stop, the direction as a whole is planned. And the Russian army will continue to move in this direction. At work, there is no news, a couple of geolocations, there are attempts to clean up and squeeze out the AFU units from the fields. Further north, the direction of the same small taxi, and the same work. That is, there are no important changes on Earth. The Kherson direction is a similar story. And of the interesting things, it is worth noting the further destruction of the air defense system in the Odessa area. Another radar, let's say, C-300 installation there, in my opinion, was detected during reconnaissance activities. And as a result of an impact, perhaps even with a Zircon or Iskander, this installation was destroyed. In other words, we have discussed the situation on Earth as a whole. Let me remind you again at the end that today is the last day of Zelensky's presidency. It is very important what will happen tomorrow, but already today, the footage has begun to arrive. Perhaps this is just speculation. Satellite images are published of the largest possible, let's say, concentration of Russian strategic bombers in the carcasses of the 95th, 22nd, 160s, and Un-12 at the airfield, let's say, Oleynikov and Deer at the Deer airfield, and it is reported that it is the concentration and preparation that is, let's say, in quotation marks, you think. To note the end of Mr. Zelensky's official term is precisely a massive missile strike on the territory of Ukraine. At least that's what sources say. What are we going to watch already until we say a new day? A new day is just around the corner, and then, in principle, everything will become more or less clear with you. Mobilizations are being carried out in Ukraine. Today, an electronic petition was registered that since Zelensky is no longer, in fact, an official president, the laws on armor-firm mobilization do not apply to him, at least they should not apply to him. It has already begun to collect signatures, to hand Zelensky a message, and send it somewhere there at 1 o'clock in the Yar. And that's it, dear friends.